What is the myth about you or about White House life that you would like to dispel?
Well, where do we start? I mean, how much time do we have?
All the time you.
Yeah, my goodness, there's so many. There's so many. Let me think. You know, I think that certainly from the outside, people see the White House as something of a mysterious place. You know, that it's a place of history and certainly of importance, and it symbolizes our democracy. But it's hard to even imagine until you live here what it's like. And I'd like to, you know, help people understand that certainly for my husband and me, we've tried to make the White House as accessible to people as possible so that it doesn't have a forbidding and formal image in people's minds, but that it is welcoming and that people do feel that it is the people's house and they are invited into it whenever the occasion arises. And we've certainly increased the numbers of people invited here for events of all kinds, because I think that in today's world it's important for people to feel as connected as possible with their government or with their president, and this house symbolizes that for many. So although, you know, we can't obviously invite every American, we take every chance we can to invite as many Americans as possible. And the numbers of tourists have increased, and all the large events that we've tried to have here, and the number of people who've been invited to something, I hope sort of destroys the myth of it being, you know, kind of a forbidding place that people are scared of, because I don't want them to be.
How can young people educate themselves about what media reports are real and what are just allegations or rumors?
You know, that's very hard, and it's getting harder because, you know, there are so many sources of information. And it certainly seems to be the case that many journalists and reporters or people with access to the internet feel compelled to just put anything out there that will get them attention or get them viewers or readers or subscribers or whatever. So I think it's becoming harder and harder for the average person to wade through all of the information to try to figure out what they believe and what they don't believe, and what could be partially true and what's totally untrue. And I think it's going to get worse. So I'm very concerned about this, because in a democracy like ours, where people have to make the majority of decisions about how they're going to be governed, either by voting or by supporting other actions at the local, state, and federal level, it's going to be very difficult for people to make good decisions if they can't believe the information that they've been given. And I guess at this point, it really requires a lot of work from citizens, because you have to read or view a lot of different sources and then try on your own to make sense of it. I don't think the average person has time for that. I mean, I don't know, if I didn't know things firsthand and I were just following the news from, you know, what is reported, I would be totally bewildered and confused much of the time. And if I were working and raising my family and involved in my community in some way, how would I ever get time to, you know, read a bunch of newspapers and get news off the internet and watch the nightly news and then say, okay, 10 people said this and 8 people said that, and I think that the 8 people are more right than the 10 people, and therefore this is what I believe. So I'm really worried about what's going to happen, because there's so much stuff, for example, on the internet that has no editing at all. It has no fact checking. It can sound good, it can convince you at first reading, but it's not true. So how do we know that? I hope that what's going to happen is that journalists will realize that they are undermining their own profession by either not policing it better so that people who are irresponsible are not held in check in some way, and not giving people ways of arriving at accurate information that they can use. Because if journalists don't perform that function, then I think people will see it just as entertainment. They won't take it seriously. They won't use it as the basis for making decisions. And then that undermines the journalistic enterprise for the future. So I think it poses a lot of very serious questions about how we're going to run our democracy. Because I have now, over all these years, I've seen so many things printed and said that I know for a fact are not true. And it just becomes so overwhelming, such an enormous pile of factoids and allegations that are out there, that I worry that people will just turn away from the political process and the democratic process, and they'll say, who can believe any of this? I don't want to follow it. I'm not interested in it. They stop voting, they stop caring, and I don't think that's good for our country. So this is something we have to work on.
Who have your role models been?
Well, when I was growing up, I certainly didn't really know, if I can remember, any women who worked other than my teachers and the librarian and a few other people like that. So I didn't admire one individual so much as I admired characteristics of people. You know, people who were resilient and courageous in the face of whatever life threw their way, whether it was an illness or some other tragedy. So I didn't have one kind of role model that I could point to. And then as I got older and I learned more about what women had done and the kinds of contributions women like Eleanor Roosevelt had made, I certainly grew to admire a lot of women because of what they'd done with their lives. So I can't say that I had one role model, but I can say that I really learned a lot by not only watching and following the women I personally knew, but reading about and trying to study the lives of women that I'd never had the chance to meet, but whose lives and choices I thought were either brave or admirable in some way.
As a teenager, what advice did your parents give you that you found was most important or most helpful?
Well, my parents always stressed the importance of education, working as hard in school and learning as much as possible. And they also encouraged me to value myself and believe in myself and do what I thought was right for me, not follow the crowd or be influenced by what the fashion of the day was. My mother always told me that every day I had a choice whether I was going to be the actor in my own life or a bit player in somebody else's performance, and that I had to make my mind up how I wanted to live, and that I then had to try to do what was right for me. And I think that is still good advice today, and I believe that certainly there isn't any more important investment than anyone can make than in education, and that individuals, particularly young women, have to be true to themselves and find out what they think is best for their lives and make the decisions that they think will enable them to pursue whatever their interests are. And that we should all be supporting young people more than I think we do as you navigate this period toward adulthood, and give you more ways to learn about and act out what you think would be of interest to you, like the magazine does here by giving you a chance to write and interview. You know, it's really saying, we have a lot of faith in you, we think that you've got something to contribute, and I'd like to see more opportunities like that for young people.
As the founder of my school's substance-free club, I've taken a position contrary to that of many of my peers. What techniques have you used to stand up for something you believe in when it goes against public opinion?
Is this a club against drug and alcohol abuse?
Yeah, and tobacco.
And tobacco, good for you. Well, first of all, you have to do what you believe is right. And that is often very hard. Sometimes even your friends don't understand and make fun of you or give you a hard time. But you've got to live with yourself. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important, is that you've been true to yourself. And that's advice from the ancient Greeks, and it's as good today as it was then. I think it's also important, though, to be sure that you're communicating effectively with your friends and your fellow students. And I've learned over the years, because there are a lot of things I feel very strongly about, that you have to be careful not to come on too strong about what you care about. And oftentimes it's not as effective to really be adamant about something, as to be matter of fact and to be humorous and to be constantly supportive. So you can help people make what for them are very hard choices. Because for a lot of young people, the peer pressure is so intense and they want so much to be popular and liked and not left out, that just preaching at them or coming up with a million statistics isn't as helpful or mind-changing as maybe just being there for them or providing an opportunity for alternative activities that they can feel a part of and accepted in, so that they don't have to be pressured into using drugs or alcohol or tobacco. And so believing what you believe in and standing up for it is critical, and then finding ways of communicating your strong beliefs that will be effective with people and not just turn them off, so that they don't feel like you're judging them so much as that you're concerned about them and you want to help them understand the consequences of choices they might make now. One thing I would like to say, and it's not so much a question as an observation, one of my goals of the last 5.5 years has been to try to lift up the lives and experiences of young people, particularly teenagers in our country, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on the part of adults, and it has led to a stereotyping and caricature of teenagers that is just not true, because I see what is happening in neighborhoods and schools and settings all over our country, and all different kinds of kids from all different kinds of backgrounds. And the vast majority of American teenagers are good, decent, hardworking, caring kids. And that is not the image that is portrayed too often in the media, where we only get the worst pictures. And a lot of the problems that teenagers have today are the same that teenagers have always had, that every one of us have gone through. But there are new challenges and problems, and I believe it is harder being a teenager today than it was when I was a teenager. And I don't think that our society understands that and gives young people enough support. We're not there for you in the numbers we should be. We don't have the kind of commitment to extracurricular and after school and weekend and summer activities that can keep young people occupied and teach them skills like writing and poetry or sports or whatever it might be. So I want teenagers to know how much the President and I value you and what you're doing, and respect the challenges that many of you face, which are very tough in lots of cases. And we want to try to persuade adults to turn off the TV images and get to know young people in schools and churches and athletic leagues and in art programs and in every other way that we possibly can, so that we can close this gap between reality and myth that undermines an accurate view of what teenagers in America are today. And if you always feel like somebody's putting you down and they don't understand you and they expect the worst from you, it goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. You can get down on yourself and you can think, well, hey, why should I keep trying? Why should I, even do anything that makes a difference? And what I want is for every young person to feel that somebody really cares about them, somebody really believes in them, and somebody's going to give them a chance to prove what they can do with their lives. And so any way we can get that message across is something I believe in very strongly.
If you could change something about yourself, what would it be?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I think I just would like to, know more about the world and what happens, and I'd like to have more time in the day, and I'd like to be able to do all the things that I am working on that I hope will help people. I mean, I would like to be able to have even greater opportunities with more time to do all the things that I'm still working on and that I care about. So that would mean I'd have to sleep less. So I'd like to change that about myself. Cut the number of hours I need for sleep, so that I would have even more hours in the day to work and be involved and meet people like you and spend time with you.
As a mother, what do you perceive are your strengths and weaknesses?
Gee, I don't know. You probably have to ask my daughter. I've just tried to do the best I knew how. And I think that it's such a challenge for any of us who are mothers or fathers, because there are very few people. There are some malevolent, evil people in the world, but the vast majority of parents try to do the best they can, given what they themselves were given as children and how they were raised and what they understand about themselves and the world. And no matter how hard you try, you're going to make mistakes. They may be different mistakes than your parents made. That's why I think that parents and children have to develop kind of a sense of forgiveness and support for each other. Because I remember when Chelsea was a baby, and one night she was just crying and crying, and I talk about this in my book, and I just didn't know how to comfort her, and I just finally said to her, I said, I've never been a mother before, and you've never been a baby before. We're just going to have to learn how to do this together. Well, certainly as your child grows through childhood and into adolescence and into adulthood, you have to keep adjusting that relationship, because how you treat a 2-year-old is not how you treat a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old. But it's hard for parents because we want so much to do what is right, and sometimes we don't always know what is right. We think we do, and we're trying very hard to do it, but it may not be right for our child or these times. And certainly for parents who have more than one child, unlike me, you can't treat any child the same as any other child, because each has a different personality, and what works in terms of parenting for one child with a certain temperament may not work with another child in the same family, out of the same gene pool. So it's a challenge constantly to try to be as alert and open and flexible and knowledgeable about yourself, about your child, about circumstances, to do the best job you can. And then I think you just everybody has to relax a little bit and try to be understanding of each other. And it's always remarkable how, as you go through stages of development, you do kind of understand each other a little better. And as young people get older and begin to think about the world on a different level and what it would be like to be a parent, they also, I think, have a little more sensitivity toward what their own parents went through.
As First Lady, you've traveled extensively throughout the 50 states. In what specific ways do we all share the same values? And in what way are regional differences and backgrounds dividing us?
Well, that's another question I've thought a lot about. And certainly, as diverse a nation as we are, there are differences. Just in the short time I was on the Treasures Tour, I went to Harriet Tubman's home in Auburn, New York, where I met with African Americans who were trying to save that treasure. And then I went to Western New York, where I met with people from the Iroquois Nation and talked with them about their traditions, and met with a group of clan mothers who carry out the traditions of the Iroquois Nation going back hundreds of years. Now, they all, have many of the same experiences as Americans in common. They have a lot of the same sense of what it means to be an American, and they wear the same clothes and eat the same fast foods, but they have differences in how they see the world and what their experiences have been. And what I want to do, and what the President has been trying to do with his race initiative, is to encourage people to celebrate our unity as a nation and be proud of what binds us together as Americans, and at the same time respecting our differences and understanding more about what makes people from different backgrounds think or act a certain way that wouldn't be your own experience. So as I travel, I see many examples of that, where certainly we have much more in common than sometimes we give ourselves credit for, but that there are differences that we should respect and honor. And everyone doesn't have to wear the same clothes and eat the same food and celebrate the same holidays and go to the same religious services to be an American. But we do have to recognize that as an American, we're bound together by the common ideals and founding principles in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. And we've been through an amazing historic experience as we've tried to bring people together to live in harmony with each other across lots of dividing lines. And I think that balance is something we should keep in mind as we move toward the new century.
What has been your most memorable time at the White House?
You know, that is such a hard question to answer because there are so many memorable moments once you walk in this door, starting with the very first time you come in, because you're not permitted to come in until after the president is inaugurated. And it's so exciting to come in, but it's also very scary because you don't know what to expect. So I've had so many different moments here, moments of great joy and sadness and what I consider to be very historic times that have happened here on the grounds, that I just can't pick one out. I've thought a lot about it. People have asked me many times, and it's impossible for me to pick one, because every day you live here, you live with such a sense of history and awe and joy about having the privilege to be here, that most days and most moments in those days end up being memorable in one way or another.
Have you ever pulled a practical joke in the White House?
Oh yeah, both by intention and unintentionally. We do a lot of surprise parties and surprise events and occasions around here. The best one that was ever pulled on me was in 1993. I arrived back at the White House one night after having been out working on healthcare reform, and the house was dark, and I got out of the car, and one of the guards said, you know, there'd been a power outage, and I was going to have to find my way into the house without any lights, and I thought that was really odd, because I know there are extra transformers and everything around, but I thought, okay. So I kind of find my way in, and one of the women who worked for me met me and said, I'm going to take you up to the second floor because, you know, all the lights are out, even in the elevator, and she had a candle. And it turned out they planned this elaborate surprise party for me. I did not have a clue. I knew nothing about it. And they rented costumes. They told people to come in costumes, and they knew that Dolly Madison was one of my favorite predecessors, and so they cooked up this Dolly Madison costume with a wig that they made me put on. It was, you know, it was really a great night. We had a wonderful time. And so we like to have a lot of parties and a lot of jokes. When my husband has his birthday, the people who work for him, like the medical office and the Secret Service and people in the West Wing, you know, they sometimes act out funny skits and give him gag gifts in front of, you know, hundreds of people. So we try to keep a light atmosphere and to keep people's you know, morale up and their enthusiasm up, because working here is very hard. I mean, the hours are very long, the responsibility is rather intense, and the outside pressures and stresses are constant. They never go away. So one of the things we try to do is to, you know, humanize it and make it fun and give people just, you know, some laughs and humor from time to time.
What can teens do to preserve America's historic heritage?
Well, that's an especially good question, given what we're doing here in the White House to promote saving America's treasures. And I had a wonderful trip through Baltimore and into New Jersey and then into New York and Massachusetts, pointing out places that were well known and places that were not very well known. And I think that in every community there is a place or a monument or someone's records and documents that can be saved because they tell us not only about our past, but something about our future as well. They point us in a certain direction. And as part of history classes, as part of extracurricular activities, as part of just an individual interest, young people should find out what is in their own community and visit some of the places and learn about them. You know, I've often thought that we don't pay enough attention to where we live, no matter who we are, unless maybe we have someone visiting and we then go to the sites and show our visitors around. but we should do that for ourselves. And I would hope that every teenager learns more about his community and tries to be involved in some project to save something. And we're going to be announcing in the fall a project as part of this, which will be, your history is our history, because we also think that young people should interview, as you are, people in their own families and in their communities to get a better sense of what's happened in the past and the struggles and sacrifices that people have made. So we're going to be encouraging people to do what you're doing, which is to interview members of their family, neighbors, other people in their community to learn more about what life was like before and what kind of lessons they can draw from that.